Really?
Yeah,
Yeah, set it up.
That's a nice little setup like that.
Oh yeah, it's very, very good, and it's portable. That's what we use out in the field.
Great.
You know, and the color that comes out there, you'll see the color is just tremendous.
Really great.
These cameras are made by RCA, and they are just fantastic. You know, you can do a studio quality, just about studio quality interview with that thing.
It's difficult to tell the difference in the quality between that and the count downstairs.
Yeah, in the studio, so we can just take things up here.
They come a long way.
Yeah. You want to go ahead? After a couple of years of the trial and appeals, you are finally now have been ordered to go to prison. What do you think about these charges that have been brought against you? Your overall impression of all this that has happened to you since the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa, really?
Well, actually, we have to go back a little further than that, Mark. We got to go back to when Mr. Hoffa was the general president, because I was involved in some federal indictments that I had won, either through the appeal courts, in which one of my cases that I won was a landmark case because the government had put electronic eavesdropping equipment in my lawyer's office. And it became a landmark case because it not only threw my case out, it threw the defendant who was with me, which increased the Black case from the Bobby Baker case. And I always felt that because of the harassment that was put on after the start of the McClellan Committee, that anybody that works for a labor organization can become a target of the federal government. And it's tough to try to control the federal government because of the massive power they have and the way they can control grand juries. Even though they say they don't, they can. But after the Hoffa disappearance, I knew that after I made my appearance with the FBI and all the authorities came in voluntarily, I knew that they weren't concerned in the truth. They were only concerned in far-fetching program, whether it was a hysterical type of program, whether it was created through the rush of the media. I felt it got out of control. And the results were that a lot of innocent people, not only myself, but Tony Provenzano, Tony Giacalone, had been brought to great pressure from the federal government. And as I said, it's difficult because, again, they got all the cards and you've got to just sit there and be subject to it. My first indictment, the government knew I was a person that did, and I said it then, I say it now. In all my 27 years of working for this organization, I don't ever in my mind considered in my mind to take something from an employer. My misfortune was that I had gone through some personal problems. I got involved, like anybody in this country can, financially, where my credit got in trouble because of a divorce. And my relationship in trying to get financing on the car faltered because of it. I lost my home, which resulted in another case. And nobody got on the stand. Even the government's chief witness was supposed to be the dealer, and he was never brought to the courtroom to testify because the government knew that he couldn't get on the stand and lie. So when you sit there and watch your liberty being put in a position that you're going to lose it because you're being framed, it's hard. It's hard on yourself. It's hard on your family. I just had gotten married. I have 3 beautiful little boys with the marriage that I adopted. And it's hard on them. And I think that bothers me more than anything else.
The 2 convictions that are standing now, the acceptance of the car, the false statement on the loan application, is there any truth to those at all, any substance?
None whatsoever. And, you know, the end results of the second conviction, they waited 7 years. Now, if I did something wrong in a bank, why did it take 7 years for the bank to complain to the federal? They never made the complaint. But it was through my testimony in the first trial that I testified that I had lost the apartment because the Internal Revenue Service had put a lien on it. And by getting that information, they went out and tried to get different personal information on me. And they went to the bank, and nobody, because I never went to the bank. I mean, the loan that I got, the mortgage I got, was done because of my relationship with a man who was dead, which hurt me very much in the case. And all through the trial, which it took a nothing case, tied up people and spent $1 million on the case because they brought witnesses in that it was unreal. What did I do wrong? I said it before when I was indicted here in Miami, that if a person goes and fills out an application and the people you're trying to borrow the money from says to you, do you own any property? They didn't say to me, go out and get an appraisal and have an appraiser appraise the property. They said, what is the value? I put down only in my mind, not to take anything, because the mortgage I was trying to secure was a small mortgage of $28,000. So, you know, I put down some property that I owned, that I felt that if somebody wanted to buy it, that would be the price on it. That was my value. Now, if they would have said, Mr. O'Brien, we want you to go out and get an appraisal, and I said to the appraiser, look, I want you to dummy this thing up for me because it's very important, then that's falsifying something. Again, I lost the apartment. The jury didn't know that I lost the apartment. The jury didn't know that the bank made over $14,000 profit. Now, O'Brien didn't get anything from the profit of that sale of that apartment. The bank wrote it off as legal expenses to get the apartment back. Now, I know and you know that it doesn't cost $14,000 in legal expenses to get an apartment back, or a car, or any piece of property that's repossessed. So again, you know, you're sitting there facing a fine and 2 years from a federal judge for something that you feel that you've done nothing wrong.
What is the, you've described them as, they are minor cases. I mean, in the scope of things, minor cases. And what's the reason that they were brought against you?
Because of the Hoffa situation. They feel, and I think it's a clear picture, that certain people in the Justice Department feel that O'Brien is going to be the individual that's going to crack the Hoffa case. O'Brien's going to run in. And that's so ridiculous, because O'Brien came in voluntarily, and O'Brien spent more time with the FBI and every police department that was involved in this investigation in Michigan. And I told the truth. And I said it before. And I said that the only person that didn't tell the truth was Esposito, who was an FBI agent in Detroit. I challenged him to a lie detector test. We both take it. I asked the media to put it on for us, NBC. I told NBC many times, and they questioned me, you set it up, I'll take the test. And the reason that he runs from it is because he'll fail the test. Because he knows that I had nothing to do with it, and yet the FBI, and he in particular, along with some zealous people in Detroit, now the guy who started all, Osier, who's no longer with the United States government as an assistant attorney, look at the results of him. He went out and started a tremendous, horrendous type of pressure. He said it in Time magazine that he was going to put us all in jail, that the government would put us all in jail. No matter what it was, if we just breathed the wrong way, we were going to go to jail. And his prediction was right. We all were convicted. And again, you couldn't survive any type of a trial in Detroit and come out with a not guilty verdict, because the amount of pressure that is being put on jurors, the amount of pressure that's being put on through publicity. I mean, they're not looking at O'Brien for doing nothing on it. How many people in this country sign a loan application and try to bolster their credit by saying, well, I'll just jump a little bit? Everybody does that. I mean, what's the big crime? No, but O'Brien got 2 years to run together. Last week in Detroit, the executives of Fruithof, who were involved in a $13 million tax situation, they got off with probation. Mr. Giacalone got 10 years. You know, is that fair? Did Mr. Giacalone get sentenced for the 10 years for being Mr. Giacalone? No, he got sentenced because of the Hoffa disappearance. And each of us that they have named from the conception have been involved with the federal government, have been harassed, harangued, and to the point that the amount of punishment that came down out of our circumstances was unreal.
Let's start at the beginning. What information do you have, if any, about the Hoffa disappearance?
The only information that I said then, and I repeat to you, is I don't know anything, because I had not been involved with Mr. Hoffa relative to any union affairs, because he couldn't get involved in union affairs. So I was in a process of taking an assignment which I wanted to get. As I said before, anybody that knows me, I'm an organizer. I like to get out in the street. I'm not too much of an administrator staying in the office. I just don't really like it. So there was a challenge, there was an offer to me to be able to come to an area that there's a need, and down the road it's going to become a tremendous need, and you're going to see a big organizing drives from not only the Teamsters, but all forms of labor, and that's in the southern part of the United States. And I was really into getting myself ready to get moved and everything else. And so that particular day, normally I was supposed to go to Toronto for a meeting. The reason I didn't go is that, first of all, my presence at the meeting it'd be a wasted trip for me. The vice president who was in charge of the meeting, Holmes, knew that I didn't need to go to the meeting because I'd been divorced myself from the Central States. I mean, from the standpoint of any assignments, because I had already made preparation and was getting ready to move it to Memphis. So I told the FBI what I did that day. I didn't have to tell the FBI anything. And that's the point that bothers me. I went there voluntarily. I could have said, no, I don't want to talk to you, and said, that's my right, and I didn't have to talk to him. But I felt concerned because Mr. Hoffa and myself, our closeness over the years, you know, people think, well, you know, I have no compassion of what had happened. But it's bothered me since it happened, and I carried very much inside me. And I went in and volunteered. I didn't have to, why should I implicate a young man like Mr. Giacalone? Here's a young man that's in the business world, never had a ticket, never been arrested, upstanding citizen, college graduate. Why
Talking about Joey.
Joey. Why should I involve Joey? This poor young man, because of me being honest, has had nothing but bad publicity, and every time it creeps up, and he's out in the business world. And it's hurt him a lot.
Although no charges have been filed in this thing, of course, you've been named as a prime suspect in the case, suspected of being the one who drove the car in which Jimmy Hoffa was either killed or driven to his death.
And I have said continually, if O'Brien is the prime suspect, why continue this falseness of O'Brien? Go to a grand jury, which they can do, and indict O'Brien, and give me a right to have my day in court. But they won't do it for two reasons. They know O'Brien is not involved in the disappearance of Hoffa, but it's like when somebody writes one of these novel mysteries, like a James Bond. They weave a novel, they weave people into the novel, and you know, in your experience as a reporter, there's a lot of times that people can get framed. And a conspiracy law in this country is a very, very, very thin law where you can get thrown into it and be innocent. And it's happened many, many times. But the government can't indict O'Brien, they can't indict Mr. Giacalone or Mr. Provenzano because there is no truth to the fact that we were involved in the disappearance of Mr. Hoffa. They won't admit it. They like to say it all the time because whether it sells newspapers or it draws publicity. And, you know, it upsets me to the point, like the other day, the second highest ranking Justice Department official in this country had a press conference related, not to Hoffa matter, but related to Patty Hearst, who's going to be given a pardon for her time that she has left in prison. And out of the Patty Hearst thing, the next morning in the paper, I picked the paper up, and there's these headlines. Government knows who killed Jimmy Hoffa and how. And then as you read the story, there I am sitting there now. I become a government witness. I'm going to get protective services from the government. They're going to change my name. I'm going to become an identity unknown, put a sack on my head, and I'm going to tell the whole world about the Hoffa disappearance. Well, that's a bad thing to do to an individual. First of all, it's not true. Second of all, I say that Mr. Civiletti, in his capacity, should not have used any names if this is what he did. And all he's done is put me in a position of being like a duck in a shooting gallery, which is not right because I have a family and they've gone through enough and they don't need to go through any more of the type of pressures that they've gone through. My wife is a very, very sick person. She has a rare blood disease, and we're trying to get her back to a little bit of the health. And each time these emotional things come down, it's difficult. So when you say from the start of this program, you know, how does it affect you? I can handle myself. I can take care of myself. But it's the pressure of your concern for the ones you love. And this what bothers me more than anything else. If I had done something, accuse me, bring me before a grand jury, and give me my day in court. Don't just keep saying O'Brien is the prime suspect. O'Brien is the government witness. It's not right.
I want to ask you something very frankly. We were just talking about the statements that have been made. I've heard them, I've read them in books and newspapers that Chuckie O'Brien is going to be the one to provide the crack in the Hoffa case. You've read it, you know, you've heard it. What's that put in your mind knowing that you're going to walk into a prison in a few days with that hanging over your head? Do you fear for your life?
Well, I don't fear for my life because that's ridiculous. Because if something's going to happen to you, I've always felt that in the business that I've been in, the emotions that you're involved in, whether it be a picket line, things happen in this world. You have no control on it. So if some harm would come to me, I have no control over it. I could be walking down the street and, you know, they killed a United States senator. They've killed the President of the United States, and they've got the best protection in the world. So if something is going to happen to somebody, you really can't say you're going to be totally protected from it happening.
Do you worry about these statements, though, leaving you very much open?
I'm more concerned about those statements because it affects my family. People that know me know that it's not true. People that I've associated with know it's not true. And the thing that bothers me again, it affects your family because they don't know what's out there in this world as far as somebody doing harm to somebody. I saw it happen. I lived it. I saw a nut come into a courtroom in Nashville, Tennessee. Didn't know Mr. Hoffa from a bale of hay. And before it was all over with, he's firing a gun in the courtroom, and he was a sick person, and it was just one of those things.
The Brill book, The Teamsters, says that FBI men and some Teamster insiders have predicted that you will be killed in prison.
Well, let me say this for Steve Brill. First of all, I think he's a fake. I think that he's only interested in one thing, and that's how much money he can put in his pocket with this particular book. Brill has written something that people who grew up in Detroit, and I'm talking about professionals, I'm talking about reporters who knew not only myself but knew Mr. Hoffa and known.
We are rolling? Yeah. Where we left off, the question that I had asked is, what on the day of the disappearance, which is, of course, the big day in question, what were you doing that day?
That day, again, as I told the FBI and everybody, I didn't have a car. I had been staying with some dear friends of mine who had a home not far from the restaurant. And what I would do is I would get dropped off at this big parking lot right by the restaurant, and another agent who lived out in that area would give me a ride to the office. And then I was bumming rides. It'd be like you don't have a vehicle, so you try to get rides here to there, and I was just doing mostly administrative work, finishing up in the office. And that particular day, I didn't change my routine that I'd been doing for maybe 3 or 4 weeks. I had gotten a ride to the shopping center, and I'd buy a paper, and I'd sit there and wait for the guy to ride because he'd come by and he had his young son who he dropped off at school, summer school. That particular day, it was no different, but a guy who owns a big wash rack concern in the city come by and blew the horn and said, "You need a ride?" I said, "No," and he went by. And I saw another person said, "You need a ride?" I said, "No." So then finally my ride came, and I went to the office. And I just had finished up everything, and Bob was out of town, and about, it was in the morning, 11:30. One of our drivers who delivers for the airlines came up to the office, and I said, "Hi, what do you got?" And he says, "I got a box from Seattle." He says, "And it's a fish, and it should be taken and put in refrigeration." So who's it for? It's for Bob. So it was one of our guys out in Seattle. They went fishing. They sent him this big fresh salmon, and it was in a plastic bag. And you know how water and ice gets all. And I said, "God," Bob's secretary says, "Well, we can't keep it here." Well, it was one of those days in our building, and there was nobody around. I mean, everybody was out in the field, and we had an old station wagon that we used for the council, and it was in the shop. I would have used that particular thing to use. So I said, "Okay, I'll get it out there." So Joe's office was close to mine. I called him, and I said, "Let me borrow your car." And he said, "Oh, sure." So he brought it over, and I dropped them off. And I put the fish in the car, and I took it out to Bob's house. And time I got there, and the time I got back, and time I got a ride to back where I was going with, the afternoon was finished, you know. And I had spent a whole day just, screwing around, delivering the fish, and getting the cars back, and then, going in the office for about a half hour, then getting a ride back out to a point where people I was staying with, he picked me up, and that was it. And, that again goes in your personal life. What happens to you? Here's two of the dearest, closest friends that I have ever had in my life, outside the labor movement, have not associated with me since this happened because the government has put such pressure on them and frightened to the point that they even said that that Jimmy Hoffa was killed in their home, and it's unreal. And because he is a large supplier to the automotive industry, he and his brothers, I said, "Look, don't feel bad. I mean, you don't need to take my pressure that would hurt you, And it was very difficult for him to understand that because we were very close, and I haven't seen him since this thing happened.
It's been written that the FBI has placed, through blood samples, through the dogs, Jimmy Hoffa in the back of that car. What's your reaction?
Well, I said that's false. That's one of the things that upsets me about Esposito. that he
FBI agent Esposito.
He's an FBI agent, would even say that. First of all, let me just say this. Let me take anybody in this particular station's car, okay, and let me have it for 48 hours. And I said it then. I said, no, I'll put the station manager or yourself or anybody in that car, because all they need to do is get some of your clothing, whether it be a shirt or a jacket you've left here, and leave it sit in that car, and then let a dog sniff something that you have at your house, and there you are. And I mean, you know, if you have a car for 48 hours, you can do a lot of things to it. But I said it then, and I said it under oath. Mr. Hoffa was never in that car, not to my knowledge. And the day that he disappeared, I had that car, and he was never in there. Because, first of all, Mark, I said it to the FBI, nothing would have happened to him if he was to be with me. Because, again, I'm not saying I'm a tough guy, but they would have had to take myself and him. I'd never let anything happen to him. And, you know, I keep hearing, you know, the FBI is now saying in some of their reports, no, I unwillingly didn't know that I was part of something. And that's so stupid, because I'm an adult and I would have to be part of something, and I would have to know what I'm doing. And to make the public think that I would be part of something and be stupid enough not to know that something was happening to Mr. Hoffa was ridiculous.
If you have, and you have claimed that you have no knowledge at all of the Hoffa disappearance, why did you take the Fifth before the grand jury investigating his disappearance in Detroit?
Because there was a crazy man by the name of Osier who had either got bitten by the media, and even then all of a sudden became not an assistant prosecutor, but a giant who was going to end the Hoffa case in 1 week. I felt, and after talking to my lawyer, he said, Chuck, you got to be crazy. You went and spent over 30 hours. I made 2 trips back to Detroit, plus the first trip, to try to help the FBI in their investigation, give them any information relative to where I was. And he said, if you go in that grand jury, with the grand jury, 24 people sitting there who know nothing except the publicity they read, you are setting yourself up to put yourself in a position that whatever Osier wants to do to the grand jury after you walk out, I can't protect you as far as a lawyer, because it's impossible. So he said, I'm telling you to take the Fifth Amendment. You should take your rights. And that's why I did it, because I got myself in a position, after being honest, of wearing a jacket. And I just didn't like wearing the jacket, because from going and sitting down and telling the truth, I then became the prime suspect in the disappearance of James Hoffa. So I said, the lawyer's right. I must protect myself, because this is only going to turn out to be somebody being framed.
Did you worry about that perhaps fueling the feeling that he's got to know something? He took the Fifth.
Well, they turned it around. You know, the government turned around and said, you know, that I took the Fifth, and they shouldn't tell anybody that, because I was always under assumption when you went to a grand jury, whatever went on in that grand jury was private. It was secret. But somehow the secrecy of the Justice Department with the leaks that came out of that grand jury, and you know, the ironic part about it, Osier, who defended the rights of liberty and justice, wound up getting fired because he brought his wife in, who was an assistant attorney who he married. He got divorced and got married, snuck her in Detroit and put her on the payroll before the Justice Department maybe 2 months later found out and fired both of them. So, you know, I knew what he was seeking. He was seeking, and I've seen it happen before, a lot of publicity. And, you know, look at the guys that he took in a position in the Justice Department with the Teamsters Union. Look where they're at today with the amount of publicity they got. Look at Neil. Neil went on to become Watergate prosecutor. He wound up, from the Hoffa thing, becoming his name well known and becoming a very competent lawyer. Every lawyer that got involved in the Teamsters through grand juries and harassment left the government within a period of 2 years, 2.5 years, and all became very prominent attorneys in their field.
Let me ask you this. You've been around a long time in the Teamsters. You knew Jimmy Hoffa. You knew the other people who are suspected. You know, you would know anybody in the hierarchy of the Teamsters. You know many of the people who would be against the Teamsters. What do you suspect? I mean, everybody's got to have a suspicion. What do you suspect happened to Jimmy Hoffa?
I don't know. I say I don't know because, you know, a lot of thoughts can go through your mind. I think I was as close to Jimmy as anybody could be. We spent a lot of hours and times together. He raised me in the labor movement. Anything I learned in the labor movement, I learned through him. And I just felt that that I couldn't put my finger on what could have happened and where it happened. Your mind can play tricks on you. He came out of the prison. He got into prison reform a lot. I thought maybe that somebody that he was associated with in prison schemed maybe to say, look, we'll snatch him. They'll pay a lot of money for him. Panicked after they got him, and whatever happened, you don't know from there. My mind runs wild sometimes when I read about the Castro Kennedy assassination thing. People involved somewhere in that plot are gone. I said to myself, the CIA in some environment maybe could have been involved to remove him from the streets. You know, there's a lot of things that go through your mind. I don't think that there is anything to do with labor. I really don't. I don't think it has anything to do with labor, because he stood for such a mark in representing the membership that the people that he came up with in the labor movement, there was just too closeness. I feel sorry for Fitzsimmons, because Fitz and he were friends from day one. He hired Fitzsimmons, and Frank has been just lambasted for doing nothing. I don't know.
It's been written that there was a big rift developed between Fitzsimmons and Jimmy Hoffa after Fitzsimmons, as has been written, got a taste of power and decided to stay in the Union, opposing Jimmy Hoffa's bid to seek the presidency.
Well, first of all,
to re-seek the presidency.
First of all, Mark, people involved with the Teamsters Union, people involved in the labor movement, and who know Fitz, like I know Fitz, because I've known Fitz since I've been 7 years old. We've been associated on a social plane growing up with his sons. We all had a very close-knit family in our organization. Fitz didn't seek that job. He was picked by Jim for that job. And Fitz has said many times, I like Detroit. I want to stay in Detroit. I like the Central States. If Jimmy came from jail and could have had the job back, I say it and with no hesitation. Fitz said, here it is. But he couldn't come back to the labor movement. He knew that there was a restriction on him. I was in San Francisco when Mrs. Hoffa had that serious heart attack. I stayed with her day and night. I was the one who felt that Mr. Hoffa should get a leave and come out there. I felt that's how serious she was. And I worked very hard to get him out. I called Bureau of Prisons and everybody else before the lawyers got involved, and with the help of Dr. Farber, who's the Dean of the University of California, because he felt, and he got on the phone and helped. And when he came out, he made his decision. I mean, he always told me, he said, Chuckie, remember one thing. This organization is too big to have an absentee president. It's not fair to the membership. I'll never forget those words he said to me, because I said, look, I think that you've earned the right to, even though you're in Lewisburg, you should run. And everybody would have supported him. But he said no. He said, this organization, and Fitz needs the authority, not as general vice president, but as general president. And the members need to have that right to have a full-time president. That's when he made his decision. I was there. All these other people are making remarks. They weren't there. I was there.
Did he plan to seek the presidency once he got out, once the restriction ran out?
He planned on getting back on a local level in the labor movement, coming back to 299.
Not as president of the IBT.
Not at a particular time. He you know, his life was the labor movement. What else did he know other than the labor movement? That was his love. Okay, it gets into your blood, becomes your love. He would have came back and taken a position in 299 as president, and got it back running the way it was before he left, because there was a gap in there. I mean, you know, there's certain leadership ability, and it needed him to come back in and get it straightened around. And probably down the road, who knows? He might have decided, you know, to go back to run for the job.
One theory exposed in recent books of why Jimmy Hoffa was killed is that he threatened to reform the Union after his return from prison. That many of the quote mob figures who were benefiting from the pension fund had him killed so that they could keep their hand in the Union. They feared that his statements that he would reform the Union, try and kick out some of the people.
Well, I laugh when I hear that, because first of all, what is it to reform? I feel that, and no one's ever going to tell me about my organization. You know, our members are being lambasted about their officers and agents and so forth. But I think we got both the best members and the finest officers in this country in the labor movement. Our record proves itself. and they're justly being accused of being mob controlled or whatever you want to talk about. And they talk about that pension fund and you know what was coming out of the pension fund. But you know, I keep saying, well, where is all this money at? Where were the loans going to? You know, every loan that's been made by that pension fund. Name all these people that are involved in it. You know, but that's a fallacy they've used since day one of the pension fund. You know, it's just like if the fund made a loan to a company, that I know one particular loan that we made a loan to the company that we had over 200 people that worked for that particular company. The company grew to where there was almost 1,000 people working for it. The loan was paid back. You know, there's such a fallacy, I think, that people believe that you came into Chicago and they took a wheelbarrow of money out every time they left. You know, it upsets me to the point that everything they say today is the mob does this, the mob does that, the mob does this. You know what? It's ridiculous as far as I'm concerned.
The Teamsters have an obvious PR problem. They've been described numerous occasions as probably the most, if not the one of the most corrupt labor organizations in this country. Is that true?
Well, first of all, Jimmy Hoffa told me one thing. He said, now when you go to work for a labor organization, you're never going to be Citizens of the Year. And I was a young man when he told me that, and I wonder what he was talking about. And as I grew in the labor movement, I could see, because, you know, when you have to put a company on strike, and one of the things we were taught in the Teamsters, that a strike is not the answer. You have to have a compromise. And Jimmy was one that really got on you about that. And his record proved itself. We didn't have a strike in the Teamsters as far as our national freight since 1935. And when you do have a particular strike and you're picketing, I remember when I was a young age and I struck the Ambassador Bridge and Tunnel, which are the main roads to Canada. Well, man, you know, when you're out there at a picket line, and even a union member, or UAW guy, or AFL guy has to go over to Canada, and he may have a little cottage over there, and he sees that picket sign, I'm the worst guy in the world. So then I started to understand what Mr. Hoffa said about that. But when you say corruption in the Teamsters, if you take a look at the record of the Teamsters Union, the rank and file record of I'm talking about rank and file officers, you show me, and I defy anybody to show us, where there's corruption, where there's a loss in union funds. Our international is run as good as any, and better than big business. Our accounting is better than big business. And I don't think we have a ratio of a loss of maybe $2,000 a year out of 1,000 local unions. And that just because there might be a mistake or a girl might have a loss in petty cash net. And I defy, and it upsets me, the remark they talk about the Teamsters Union being corrupt. As far as I'm concerned, again, I say, I think we're the best run organization in this country. And PR-wise, there's no question about it. We don't have a good image PR-wise because we've been always put on the offensive. If there's a picket line, there's a fist fight, we're the bad guys. Take today. A good example today is the Fraternal Order of Steel Haulers. Here, the Teamsters are trying to control and negotiate for people who are in a position that's tough for. And Jimmy said it many years ago about a broker. I remember one time as a young guy, he told the brokers, look, park your equipment. If you ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you would never get enough to take care of yourself and your equipment. And some of those brokers that get involved in the equipment, their cost, and what it costs to operate a piece of equipment today, they'll never make it. I don't care if they haul steel 7 days a week. And look at what they're doing to truckers and to local unions who are trying to uphold the law and a contract that we have with an employer. They're shooting out equipment. If that was the Teamsters doing that, I want to tell you something. Back a few years ago in Youngstown, Ohio, when we had one of our agents killed in that fracas down there. There would have been special grand juries. We would have been indicted, innocent or not, are guilty. And look what's happened. These people are just having a run of the roads, and nobody's doing anything about it. No one. And our local unions are saying, "Hey, look, to the government, we need some help. We got to protect our members." And they're not getting any help. And they make statements. If I made a statement like Hill made relative to what he was going to do as far as a Fraternal Order of Steel Drivers, which is a small group of people who believe that they're going to be able to do something they don't know they're going to be able to do, because you can only get a certain commodity and a certain price for that commodity when you haul it.
I want to ask something about Jimmy Hoffa. What, in the long run, did he do for the average working Teamster? Briefly, it's been written and speculated that he brought mob control into the Teamsters. Yet it's also been said he did a lot for the working man. In your assessment, what did Jimmy Hoffa himself do for the average working Teamster, good or bad?
Well, I feel this way, and I may be prejudicial in a sense. I feel that that he will go down in history. My children, my children's children, he will go down in history as probably the greatest labor leader that came into the labor movement. Even greater than John L. Lewis, even greater than Gompers and some of these people talk about, because he had the foresight and the ability to do one thing. He had the foresight to know that to protect his member, that he could not stand within a small area. He couldn't have a good contract in Detroit and not have one in Chicago. And he knew to stabilize the industry that a national master freight agreement was the key. And he proved that. I mean, today, what the trucking industry today is as strong and healthy as it's ever been because he stabilized it with that master contract. And mind you, he got that master contract without 1 hour's loss. I remember when he was negotiating the first master contract, headlines, cartoons, pictures of Hoffa standing up with strings, going to control the United States, Hoffa to control the world. And yet he signed that contract without 1 minute's loss. And in that contract, he stabilized the industry. He got benefits for our members second to none. He started the hospitalization, health and welfare, iron dental, and it's grown to where we have as good as coverage as anybody in this country for our members. And there isn't a soul who is retired and hasn't got his pension, and that check comes every month. But yet the public feels that there's nothing left in the pension fund, that it's completely depleted.
Is there ever going to be a time, that's been a stated fear, that a worker will be unable to get his or her pension?
That's not true. Every worker that is covered in that pension fund is protected. There's no question about it. But take a look at the record of the people who are running our fund now, and I don't know if you have. Look at what they've done with some of our investments and how they've lost $8, $9, $10 million because they don't know what they're doing, but yet nobody's. But our ratio of loss is nil compared to some of these big institutes.
Yeah.
Oh, unreal.
Are we all set, John?
Yeah.
I haven't got that much more to do. I want to ask you about some of the people
Sure.
who have received a lot of publicity in the Hoffa case. One is Anthony Giacalone, who you know has been described as an organized crime figure and a prime suspect in Hoffa's death. Describe him. What kind of man is he?
Well, first of all, Tony is one of the strongest individuals I have been associated with as far as his personality. He is very sharp, very aware, very fine business mind and personality. There's two sides of him. When he is conducting business or involved in something, that's where it's at. The other side, he's a tremendous family man. He's a type of person that that the public really don't know, but people that got to know him, that are not associated with myself or anybody else, fall in love with this individual as a human being.
Is he an organized crime figure?
Well, organized crime figure. You keep hearing that, and I keep saying, well, where is organized crime? Is organized crime when a bunch of kids break into a drugstore? Who sets the policy for organized crime? Who puts you in that position? Who's associated with organized crime? Is John Kennedy, through all the accusations relative to the book, is he part of organized crime? That's how crazy it is. No, he's not part of organized crime. He's an individual who grew up, worked very hard growing up, didn't have an opportunity to do a lot of schoolwork because of the times. A lot of people grew up that way. He got himself in a position in different investments, self-made man, and no, I don't believe he's part of any such organized crime.
He's been listed as a suspect in the Hoffa case. Could he have been involved in the killing in any way?
I feel that this man is being attacked unjustly. This man is being put in a position that he shouldn't be put into, but he's being put there because he's Tony Giacalone.
How about Anthony Provenzano, also described as an organized crime figure and a suspect in the Hoffa case, and who has now been convicted and sent to prison for life? What kind of man is he?
Well, first of all, Tony Provenzano is a rank and filer. Tony Provenzano spent 58 months with Mr. Hoffa in prison. They were close friends outside of prison, close friends inside of prison. And I get so uptight when I hear people say there was tremendous arguments and fights. And it's so untrue, because their relationship was as close as any two human beings could get, especially in a prison like Lewisburg. Tony's a fine man. Tony's conviction in New Jersey. Now, how do you convict somebody without a body, and how do you convict somebody using a witness, a government-paid witness, who's sitting in a penitentiary saying to his cellmate, who testified in Tony's case, I'm getting out of here, and the guy says, how? He said, I'm going to say something about Tony Provenzano. And here's a man who comes down after 17 or 18 years. The prosecutor still can't believe that Tony was convicted. But Tony didn't get convicted for that crime. He got convicted for the Hoffa publicity. And I say today to you today that down the road legally, he's going to win his appeal, and he's going to come out of that prison.
You have been described in a book recently as being in great fear of Tony Provenzano.
Well, I'll tell you what. I don't know anything about writing, but I think I'm going to start writing some books, because if you can make the kind of money that these people are making, I'm making a real sad mistake. I hear how I've been hiding from Tony Provenzano. I don't know. I see his wife at least a couple times a week, and his children. They live down here. In Las Vegas, they had me hiding under a bed. I had dinner with him and his family for 2 nights. So if that's being in fear of Tony Provenzano, well, then that's a nice kind of fear.
What about Frank Fitzsimmons, Teamster president who took over the union from Jimmy Hoffa? What kind of man is he?
Fitz is a fine labor leader. Fitz is a type of person who isn't flamboyant. He does a super job. He's a super negotiator. And Fitz, again, is being labeled and wearing an unjust jacket for something that he has never been involved in and had nothing to do with. And you hate to see the president of the biggest union in the world, who is about to start negotiations on our National Master Agreement, and who has the pressure of what's happening with President Carter's policy on 7% and trying to satisfy 500,000 or 600,000 people, and trying to do the kind of job he must do, being labeled unjustly. Now, Fitz has really been as I just feel bad because he's been put in a position he's been put into.
I want to ask you,
You know, and again they say, I've joined Fitzsimmons' side. Why don't you join Fitzsimmons' side? He's been on my team that I played on since I came to the labor movement. I worked as a business agent. He was vice president of my local union. We elected him a vice president at the convention. We were all on the same team. And, you know, to say, you know, I jumped teams, you know, it really upsets me, because one of the things that Mr. Hoffa told me to do is to make sure I worked twice as hard supporting whatever Fitz needed to be done.
there was no split between the two leaders.
There was no split between the two leaders. They got me split with Mr. Hoffa. I made a decision. I fell in love. Love's changed the world a lot. And by falling in love with a super girl, I had to make a decision, because she was a Southern girl, that I had to make a move to be able to come to the South, because she didn't. Part of my problems when I first tried to get married was that she didn't want to move north.
The Southern Conference, which you worked, well, how long did you work with the Southern Conference?
I worked for the Southern Conference.
As an organizer?
No, I came to work for Vice President Morgan. He put me in a position as heading up his construction division, and I stayed there until July
Of this year?
of this year.
And then you resigned from
I
the Teamsters?
resigned. Yes, I did.
To put all this behind, so you can go to prison? Why did you resign?
I resigned for 2 reasons. Again, the people who don't understand the labor movement will think that I'm, you know, just saying it to be saying it. I grew up in the labor movement to knowing one thing: you must service your members. The amount of publicity that was being put on me, the amount of time that every time in the position that Mr. Morgan, Vice President Morgan, had me in, it's important. We had you attend area contract negotiations, etc., and you get over to Houston, or you get over to some location, all of a sudden you got to come back because somebody from the federal government want to talk to you. And it was frustrating to me, because the programs that I was trying to do, I couldn't give 100%. And I finally said, look, again, I go back to what Mr. Hoffa said to me in 1971 in San Francisco. The membership need full-time people. And I felt that it would only be being fair to Vice President Morgan to say to him, look, Joe, I can't be full-time. I'm frustrated. I just got to make my mind up to resign and try to get my personal problems out of the way, so whatever happens when I get them out of the way, that my first love is to come back to the Teamsters Union and go to work. And
is that what you plan to do once you serve this time, and if you have to go on the other charge, you serve that? Is that what you plan to do?
Well, the other charge
still appealing.
is running concurrently with the first charge, and to say to you today that I wouldn't is untrue, because this has been my life. I mean, it's like a guy who drives a truck every day. It's your life. It's in my blood. Now, whether I come back for the Teamsters, I don't know. There's a lot of opportunities, and some people have talked to me from other organizations. Whether I would go with them, I don't know. My first love is the Teamsters, and I hope that when I get my personal problems out of the way, that I can come back and be able to do some services for the people that I had the honor to serve for this many years.
Now the Southern Conference is under investigation, the strike force down here, the Labor Department down here under criminal investigation. What do you think about that?
Well, I think this. I think that the federal government, again, as I said in the start of this interview, has power that nobody can match. And if it's Joe Morgan today and the Southern Conference, or Chuck O'Brien tomorrow, you can't stop it. We've been under an investigation since I can remember. Back when I first started to work in 1953, it started with the investigation in Michigan and then went on to McClellan and right down to this day. I just think that they have the authority to harass anybody they want. But somewhere along the line, some federal people, whether on a judicial plane, is going to say, hey, wait a minute, no fishing exhibition. And this is what they've done down there. They've told the government and the task force, hey, you're not just going to go in there and fish and tie up a business or an operation. And I think that they're carrying out just a total harassment against the Southern Conference. And it's a shame because they could spend better time taking care of the flow of narcotics coming into this country and stop the number one threat that I think as a parent is the amount of narcotics that is creeping into the schools and to young people. If they would put their energies into stopping that, they wouldn't have to worry about the Southern Conference or the Teamsters or anybody else. And again, I just think it's a fishing expedition. It's a means to make you spend money, which you shouldn't have to spend. And who's going to match the federal government? I haven't seen anybody big enough to match them dollar for dollar. That's a tough competitor. And whatever comes out of that investigation, and how long have they been investigating the Southern Conference? A long time. Now, if there was something really bad there, it sure wouldn't take this long to find it out. Now, they may come out with some minor infraction just to harass somebody, but the people that they're trying to harass, they're innocent. They're, again, innocent victims.
Let's change the subject and go to what is immediately at hand, and that is that shortly you've got to report to a prison. We don't know which one yet, but you have to report personally.
Right.
What are your feelings on having to go to jail?
Well, it's something that as a person I'm going to have to face. I mean, you know, just, as the coach from Chicago said, it don't end until the fat lady starts singing. Well, the fat lady's singing, so you know I'm going to have to go. I don't like it. I mean, I've got 5 children. One that's just finished college. She's student teaching. She teaches every day. It's going to be, you know, it's in the paper. I've got 3 fine boys going to school down here. But the thing that makes me feel the best about it, that they're supporting me. And you can't ask them more than that.
Have you talked to anybody who has ever served time to help you?
Well, I have, over the years, been associated with putting people to work and giving them an opportunity. I pretty much know what goes on. We built in St. Louis that home for inmates. Mr. Hoffa did with Father Desmond Clark. It was very successful in helping people get on a work program. Because if a guy comes from that place, gets an opportunity, he don't want to go back. And I hope if I get there that I can get my time out of the way, mind my own business, and that's the type of person I am. And from inside the prison, if I can help somebody that's going out, I'll sure write a letter to one of the local unions saying, look, help this individual. No, I'm going to do that.
I want to ask you another point again, and we've covered it before, but because we're on this point, because of what has been written about Chuckie O'Brien being the one who's going to be the one to break the Hoffa case because he's going to get afraid of the prosecution or the prison and he's going to talk. Do you fear that because that has been said, true or not, the fact that it's been said, that you could be harmed because of that?
I'm not if I was a fortune teller, I'd be in good shape. I don't think so. I think that the ordinary guy, anybody, even a guy in prison, got to know that it's a scam. I just don't know how you can be a little bit pregnant. You got to be pregnant all the way. And Chuckie O'Brien's not a little bit pregnant, and Chuckie O'Brien's not going to talk to anybody relative to the Hoffa matter because there's nothing I can say relative to the Hoffa matter. Now, if those people who want to write about Chuckie being the person who's going to crack the Hoffa case, I would say that they need to see a good psychiatrist because there's just no way that Chuckie's going to do that because Chuckie couldn't do it if he wanted to do it.
If you had to do it all over again, would you have, just with all of this crap that's going on, would you have allied yourself with the Teamsters and Hoffa if you had to do it over again?
Going back from day one?
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't change a day. I wouldn't. No, I wouldn't. I grew up in the Teamsters. They're part of my life, and I wouldn't change one day. The day I could, if I had the power to change, the day disappeared. Now within me, I would try to stop.
How did that affect you?
Well, how would you like to lose the closest person to you, the person that you loved as if he was your real father. It's affected me from the standpoint that I've lost, in a sense, a father. You know, everybody pegs you're either. I laugh. I see the the headlines, self-styled this, self-styled that. I'm not self-styled. I loved that man since I've been a child. He treated me as a son. Whether it was legal or not, he was still a son. And this country, through its lifetime, is trying. There's a lot of kids that never had a father, and you try to help them through the Good Brothers and all these organizations. And every boy looks up to somebody, and whether it be a ball player, what it is. And I attached myself to him, and I wouldn't trade a minute of it. I just wouldn't trade a minute of it.
Any other, as I told you I would, open it up to anything else, any other points you wanted to cover? Is there any other?
Only the standpoint that I feel that, as I said before, Mark, I feel that the Justice Department, somewhere along the line, somebody should have a right to be able to put a muzzle on them from making innuendos that aren't true. If they were true, I say go to the grand juries, indict the people that they're trying to talk about. But if you don't have the truth, continue to investigate. I have no qualms about them to continue to investigate. They should do that. But to implicate innocent people and to implicate innocent families, that's what's wrong. And this country, to me, was not built that way. And I think that as I sat in that courtroom many times and after being indicted 5 times, and I don't make that a proud record because who wants to be indicted, but I always wondered why that woman that had the scales was covered up with a blindfold. And I really think I know why, because she couldn't stand to see what some of the stuff that was going on. And one of these days that blindfold's got to come down. I think the young people today are, and the best proof is through Watergate. They're not going to buy all that, and they're fighting. And by them fighting, look what's happened. Indictments have come down on the FBI. Who ever thought the FBI was going to be indicted? But they are, whether they like it or not. They are, and other agencies are going to be involved in the same thing. So I just hope that that in my lifetime that I'll never continue fighting for knowing that I'm innocent, and the opportunity sometimes to be able to do it on public television to the media, because this is the way America lives. Everybody turns the box on, they're going to look. Every time they turn the box on, I come out the bad guy. Well, a lot of us are being pegged as bad guys, and we really aren't. And I hope to change that somewhere down the line. So again, this is my feelings.
Any other things you want to cover or have me ask you about?
Oh,
Is that pretty much it?
I think we've covered the waterfront. I could talk about Mr. Hoffa all day.
Yeah.
I don't know how much your viewers would want to hear about Mr. Hoffa, but I'm down the road somewhere. I'm going to write a book.
Are you?
Oh yeah, and try to put some real facts in it, and not all that whodunit.